In this demonstration, we will be processing a document that requires a database query to obtain additional information about the customer. We will start with an invoice that has the company name. We'll print this invoice to the FabSoft Universal Printer to begin the configuration. For a simple workflow, we'll be sending the document to a folder with an XML metadata file. However, the same database query could be used for any type of workflow. Here, I will give the workflow an easily recognizable description. I will then configure the workflow to identify the document by checking for the invoice number text on the printed document. Since the number itself will change, I will remove that from the identifier. Now we will begin configuring the database lookup. Locate the additional data sources property and click the Configure button. Next, click the Configure button for SQL Server Database. If the database is not running in Microsoft SQL Server, you can use the ODBC property instead. We will enable the data source and configure the values that will be required as input to the SQL query. In this case, it's the company name from the printed document. Next, we will configure the connection to the database as well as the credentials required to authenticate. Last, we will enter the desired SQL query. You can manually enter the input variable name where needed, or double-click the entry at the top of the window to automatically insert it at the cursor. Clicking the Test Query button will show the workflow variables that will be produced by the query. We can now click OK to save the settings and close the remaining pop-up dialogs. Back at the workflow configuration screen, we can now use the results from the SQL query in the workflow properties. I will be creating an archive that contains the company name as a subfolder. The file name will consist of the invoice number. Since the number is grouped with the words invoice NO period, we can use a modifier to adjust the value to obtain only the number that we want. There are several modifiers that may help with this situation, but for now, we will simply use the remove text option. We can also use another modifier to trim the result to ensure there are no extra spaces. Using the text box at the top of the screen, we can test different values to see how the modifiers will affect them. Clicking the Reset button will return it back to the original value. Now that we have the number portion of the invoice number text, we can continue concatenating more values in the file name. I will add a character as a separator. Then we can add the date from the printed document. Since the slash character is not permitted in the file name, I'll be using another modifier to replace the slash with a dash. To reconfigure any property, simply click the Configure button again. Here I'm going to change the separator character to an underscore to make the file name easier to read. Now I will add additional fields that will be stored in the XML metadata file. They will include the company name, email address, and phone number from the variables generated by the SQL query we configured earlier. To see the resulting XML, we could click on the Preview button in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. To test the actual output of the workflow, we can click on the Test Output button. Here, we will see the output TIFF file in XML that contains the configured data. Clicking Finish will send the document through the workflow and save the workflow configuration. Now that the workflow is configured, we can alter the document and print it again to see the results change to match the new data. Changing the invoice number and the date will produce a new set of files in the Archive folder. Changing the company information will change the folder that is created, as well as the results from the SQL query that are stored in the XML metadata file.